I've been a therapist now for nearly 28 years, which shocks me most of the time. I've been working with all sorts of conditions since I started, but what I really love dealing with is the defense mechanism. So, two parts of the mind. Conscious mind, I'm really good at this, the children love it because they can relate to me, and the subconscious mind. And this is the area that I work with. The definition of hypnosis is altering our conscious mind, or all paying great attention to me, thank you, to the outside there. They're distracted, the bored, the staring out the window. And in that state, in that change, that allows access to this area. So this is the defense mechanism. And you all know all about this, so flight and fight. And they're the three elements: the flight, the fight, and the staring at the bunny in the headlights. That's what children will be. You're staring out the window and they're in an altered state. When we're doing anything repetitive, we're in an altered state. And that's usually when a child or an adult has stopped engaging. So when they're in this place, they're not going to reason. None of us are. Right? We're not listening because we're here. We're in the bubble. All that conscious information of how good we are at stuff, of what happened an hour ago when our mother praised us, that's gone out the window. I'm going to be very literal here. We're in hell. Right? We're in a black place. There are many ways of describing this, that nothing good is happening. We just feel overwhelmed. And my work is to help parents, because I see a parent and then I see the child, so I can see how they actually engage with each other. So I use words that musicians, dancers would use. There's a vibration. So if we're dancing, I have to pick up the music and I have to pick up what my partner's doing. Okay, so all you musicians will know all this, and dancers too. Very strange to think that you'd have to do that with a child, but you do that from the time your child is delivered, if you have delivered children, because you're picking up when they are hungry, when they need changing, what their cues are. And it's all very emotional. There's very little conscious work there at that point, apart from mothers, fathers planning things. The emotional relationship then starts to develop. And most of the children I work with, and I think you may agree with this, the children live in this place most of the time. They're reacting. They are in a state of hyper-reactivity. So they're ramped up to what I'd call 20, rather than where we could actually communicate at about 3 or 4, where the child is listening, able to take on instructions, able to remember patterns that we have taught them through repetition. So when I'm working with a child, it makes perfect sense to them, because they're all experts at this, aren't they? Right, so there we go. You want to see a picture of my husband? Let's do it. Right, so they get it, because this is the brain. Right. So if I didn't know about the brain, and if I didn't know about an iPad, I've learned so much with the children, because if I shout at this, or if I ask this to do something, it's not going to do anything. I actually have to engage with this and do something. And before apps were invented, we had files, and then we got really clever with this. So your children are recording instruments. They aren't decision makers, and they are learning all the time. They're learning through what we tell them, but more importantly for children, they are learning through what they see, our behaviour, our reactions, because they are recording all of that. And I don't know about you, but with nieces and nephews, they say exactly what we've said when we're overreacting in the perfect time sequence. Okay, so my 3-year-old niece, when she was 3, she's 30 now, she could swear perfectly in the right context, right? Because they are copying, and sometimes they copy us too well. So and then we don't like it because it comes back at us. So I'm just pausing this bit. The subconscious mind here, the defense state, so there's a conscious mind, and then the subconscious mind runs the autonomic nervous system. And in the context of this, it means that we're reacting. So when we slip out of our conscious, listening as you are, paying attention, we then go into a state where there are conditioned responses. So all the files, like my apps, are stored in the subconscious. I'm probably making this not so clear because this is where the defense state is, but that is the subconscious. I'll put that there. So the two things. Right. So we've all got files. So the files are just like an album, so things that happen. By the way, this doesn't know if it's yesterday or today, just like my iPad doesn't. I can read it. So perhaps I had a bad experience yesterday, and I'm coming to give a talk, and the last talk I gave, something happened and I wasn't very happy. I'm going to be bringing that information automatically in my expectation to what I'm going to be finding here. But very luckily I had a great experience sitting in the audience last time, so I was really looking forward to coming here. Right? So that's what my filing system tells me. With children, because they are maturing and they are developing and they are learning, they're at that front end of getting an awful lot of information and learning how to handle themselves in that particular environment. And so for them, it's good or bad. They're really good at this or they're really bad at this because they polarize. There's no sort of grey ground because emotions are up or down. They really want to be good at something, and then this gets in the way. They can't control or manage because they are learning. Right? And they look around. This is the information I've got over the years for the children I work with, and everyone seems to find this so easy. You know, they can pay attention, no one's being picked on, and they feel picked on. This is word for word what I've heard from some of my clients. Once we feel picked on, our flight and fight mechanism fires up, and we go into a defense state. So we can't engage in the same way. We're processing. The thoughts are going round and round in our head. How did that happen? Why did he say that? How could he have done that? You know, why am I getting into trouble? And that feeling rises, it increases, ramps up. And then someone innocently says, "You're not paying attention." Bang, there's a reaction, okay? There's an interesting program that I haven't actually looked at yet, you might have probably looked at it, of parents going back and being children and studying for their GCSEs. They're at the front end of being told what to do the whole time. So I thought I'd put that off till I'd given this talk. But so there's a lot of behavioural issues. And so with one of those examples, that child comes home. They're not allowed to react too much because there's so many consequences and penalties. They come home. Well, you know what they do. 4 o'clock, they're tired. Some of them will be on medication, right? And then we go to what you as a parent are expecting to deal with when you meet your child, right? So it's based on your previous experience. So if it was a good morning, that will be fine. If it wasn't particularly, well, this happens in every household with children, not particularly your group. But it's that feeling that hasn't quite been released. So our conscious mind is doing its best to manage the situation using all the information you are all expert at, because there's so much very good information out there. But what I deal with really is, why does it go wrong? Why do we overreact? And then the fallout of that. So when a parent is in a better place, some of the time the situation is better for the child because you are leading. Okay? Often it feels like they are taking over, and you don't have a say in it. It's exhausting. There must be another word for exhaustion.
Parenting.
Pardon?
Parenting.
Yeah, parenting on 24/7. Yeah, it is exactly so. So my work is helping to move out of this defense state to a better place. Use a different colour. Some of the time. It's managing our expectations, which sounds very business-like, but, you know, so I work front to back. So one of the things that the parents I work with know is that I have these numbers. And I hope nobody looks at this because there are all these scribbles. So, right, the children all get this immediately. So, this came from looking at a cookery book years ago, and I found, and you'll probably know this yourself from your own experiences, that whoever the child is, they get the whole process of baking because there are ingredients, there's a shopping list. They're usually pictures that show at the number 8, there's the cake, that's what it looks like, so we can work back. So if we follow all these instructions, we'll end up with a cake from their point of view. So then I started using this instead of getting the cookery book out the whole time, of being able to say, okay, so we're starting here. But managing our expectation here is actually saying, right, that's where we'd like to go. That's like putting the instructions into your sat-nav and then pressing start. So you have a visual, because we're stimulating the highly tuned part of the brain, their brain, our brain, to say, right, this is where I want to go. Now here, if we follow these instructions, we will get here. Also in emotional work, where someone is starting off really well, they get stuck here and they don't know how to get here. So they keep going round and round number 2. And then they start losing hope because they don't think they're going to get to number 8. Then as the adult, we don't think they're going to get to number 8. Right? And we can be parents, teachers. So then our energy starts, so here we go, we're back in the defense state. So the adult now is back in the defense state, and I work with an awful lot of teachers. So here we are, right, in the defense state. My voice isn't very soft. It's very tight. It's very sharp. It's very clipped. Right. My husband doesn't like it, and he doesn't respond really very well when my voice gets hard and clipped and sharp because the embroidery's gone. Right. So he gets into his defense state. Now, I don't like the sound I'm hearing because I'm in a hypersensitive state because I'm in my defense mode. Right. It's magnifying everything. So where he's saying something quite reasonable, I'm feeling it's completely unreasonable and I don't like the way you're talking at me. Right. Now my ego turns up. I'm going to resist this. However sensible it is, I'm going to do exactly the opposite. And now he's going to tell me what I'm doing wrong. So we're going to heaven this way, aren't we? We're all going to a good place. Okay. So the aim of the game is really being able to dial it down here. Because with any of us, and I feel much more comfortable talking about me and my husband, when we deal with this, with anything up here, we're not going to do very well. When we deal with something here, we have a hope that we can level it off and move nicely on to the next stage and build up, we'll go back to the children, their confidence. Look, you've done this. We'll get here, but let's just practice this a little bit. Right. Other thing is, are you allowed to lose your temper and get frustrated? No, that really is a question.
Probably not, but I do.
Yeah.
I think we can if we apologise afterwards.
Okay, but that's lovely. That's a lovely. That's absolutely right because children will accept it. But in ourselves, I don't like it when I lose my temper. I don't feel good. I'm back in my defence state. And however much we know, and this is the area I work in, You know, we say lovely things like, we love you, but it's your behaviour that's bothering us, right? Or is affecting your sister or brother. But we love you, okay? But when I'm in my defence state, I don't love anyone. I can't, okay? I'm not supposed to, because I'm in fight. There's no good being compassionate. I'm in flight, so everything is moving out, want to run. Or very rarely would I be in the stunned bunny mode unless I feel completely overwhelmed, which yes, perhaps we would. So how do we deal with just gently keeping that child there, or not going to hear, which is the good part? But while we're here and this isn't working, number 8 can also be, we're never going to get there. And I have my word that makes most of the children I work with giggle, and they say I've made the word up, and you know I haven't. It's called catastrophizing, right? We're going to hell. This is never going to happen. Never going to get to 11, never mind 8. Right? No one's going to want them. No school's going to take them. That's catastrophizing. And you see this small person taking over. So our work, parents, is to contain this, to come out of the defence state as soon as possible, out. Now, there's a wonderful habit that we have in our conditioned responses from our own upbringing, because remember, we've got a whole set of those from our childhood, that aren't really updated. There is no facility in our system, because our brain was designed quite a long time ago, and 90% of the time it's fantastic that we've learnt our stuff early on through behaviour, through practice, through schooling, and then it's there, perfect, all there in the subconscious, in that filing system, all ready to be used. So the smell of bread that you smelt when you were 5 or 7 on that family holiday will just hit you. Right? Sound of an old record, music will stimulate thoughts of a long time ago. Right? Happens automatically, that shift. Moves out of here into conscious mind, and that's how we recollect, remember. Right? This doesn't have a time frame. So something that happened 10 years ago, when it comes up to the conscious mind, it's our conscious mind that says, oh, that was a long time ago. But can we just imagine for a moment how difficult it is when we've just had a row with someone, or a disagreement, or resistance, and we don't have any time for this to settle. The information there doesn't settle, so it all sort of merges into one. Right? The child feels that there are no files that are set up. Well, that was yesterday, but today it's a bit better. All the negatives, what they perceive as negatives, all pile into one big, I call it a bin. And then that starts to get overwhelming. So that's how I usually meet children and parents in this particular environment, that we're starting to set files up. So the reaction dials down, and then the parent can help them access this and say, yeah, but we don't need to go there, because there's a process, they follow it. They know that they don't have to go there, but they can visually see it, just like we can when we put the sat-nav instructions and you see the route. Right. Without the route, without the visual, talking, there's no map reading for the brain to follow for them, and for most children, for most adults, quite frankly. But when they know if they do this and they do that, and they can back up, go on, they'll get to number 8. But you've set the expectation, that's what we're going to do. It's like you said, Alistair, when we were talking, we're waiting for the taxi. But usually we'll come up with, now, I want you to go upstairs and brush your teeth. because we're going to be late for the taxi. They're not hearing the words, they're hearing our tone. And when you're ready, then you can play on your computer. Well, what's the word they've heard? Yeah. Everything else is gone. Because why would it interest them? Why do they need to brush their teeth? And why are they bothered about timing and keeping the taxi? That's our stuff, not theirs. Until they learn, if they do, if they want to, at that point in this particular example. So then there's opposition, resistance. So we learn to phrase things back to, we go to what we want to happen. And there's the voice, some of the time. So remember, we remind them, because just like the apps, if you think, remember yesterday you were bang on time with 5 minutes early, that's fantastic, wasn't it? So let's try and do that again. These are just ideas. This is, you're all experts at this, but this is what we're actually saying to the child. We don't want to start the morning up here, because if you're up here, you're going to be going to school up there. Most of the children I work with, their behaviour, their attitude is quite wonderful at school for what they are dealing with. Right. The medication they take is for a reason. It's to suppress their vibration so that they can actually dial it down, change gears, be more engaging, be more receptive. It's an awful lot, because their brain is, I'm quite interested in that projector now, and I've lost train of thought. That light's exciting over there too, and I like that clock. It reminds me of the one at home. Their brain's doing this the whole time. She's got a nice pen. I like that pen. Now someone's going to say, well, what are you talking about? You need to pay attention. But I prefer to pay attention to that pen than go back on track. That's what her brain is, their brain is doing all the time. So paying attention is a concept that's really quite irrelevant to that brain. But that's what they're dealing with at school, and they do. So their energy is, their bodies are working three times harder than, I don't know, an ordinary child, but a child who hasn't had the diagnosis, who's waiting for the diagnosis. Their brain chemistry is very different, and they're dealing with drugs too. And then they come home and they don't know how to offload. So you know how your children, and it's so random, isn't it? One day it might be absolutely fine and dreadful things have happened at school, and another day it's been perfectly fine, and then they just pick up the iceberg. So you all know about your iceberg. Who knows? There's the anger. What's under here? Who knows? And that's another thing that I help them recognize what their feelings are. It's like we're unraveling a huge muddled group of strings that they aren't really attached to. So they might feel upset, they might feel sad, they might feel absolutely frustrated, right? They feel different. The biggest thing for them when they're dealing with school is their friends, or lack of, because perhaps their behaviour. But that would be happening anyway, but it's ramped up to 20. Right? And then they have that, and they come home and they need to put it somewhere until they learn how to just offload it or dump it. They don't have to address it or deal with it first. The first stage, go back to my process, is there's a feeling. So that's number one. Well, to them, like most of us, we don't want it, right? Because they feel there's something wrong with having that feeling. It's quite appropriate to be angry or frustrated or deeply hurt sometimes. And again, because they're in their emotional mind, because they're supposed to be, because they're developing their emotional mind, it's all an emotional reaction, because that's what children do, until by the time they're 7 to 11, they're starting to pick up on the conscious mind, which is judgment, which is working out a consequence. Best not to do that. But this will happen. But to a child who is in this emotional place, that's going to be opposition, that's going to be resistance. I don't do the or else. Who cares? Because they're in the moment. In our subconscious mind, we're in the moment. We are feeling. Right? There's no an hour from now. There is no an hour behind. We are here, and this is what we're doing. We are fighting, or running, or not communicating at all, because that's the only place they have the power. There's an awful lot of power in not communicating. Especially when we as adults are saying, "You listening?" Why do I want to listen? I don't like your tone, and your face isn't smiley anymore. And I don't like being treated like this. So internally, I'm outraged that I find myself in this position. So what is my power? I'm going to do exactly the opposite of what you are telling me to do. You're not asking me nicely because I've been told that's the right way of doing something. Well, you're not. So it's very, very, that's the draining part, isn't it? Right. And minimising. That's what I help parents do, to deal with they've got a better capacity then to actually handle a really complicated situation, while you're helping your child develop their strengths, because they have enormous strengths. I always say when they start, because I see their brain as a Ferrari. Okay, well, I couldn't get into one and drive it, right? And learning how to parent, learning how to engage with these amazing brains is a feat. And all of you, every single one of you, you have one thing in common that isn't shared with the other people, other parents, is that you would never have thought before you got onto this trip, this journey as we call it nowadays, how much patience you did have, how much perseverance where you get up and do it again when you really don't want to. And there's so much information for groups like yourself on how to manage the child. I've been on Pinterest for other things like stained glass, but I found this one, this is written by a young lady who's about 15. She said the things that you don't do, which is very useful for me because we put that into our work with children, is assigning blame. But then we have that from our old programming, from our childhood. Someone's right or wrong, it's your fault or someone else's fault. She said exerting control really doesn't work because I'm going to resist it. I'm going to fight because that's all I can do, because I don't have a map. She didn't say that, I'm saying that. Arguing, well, they become great at arguing. Okay. But arguing just revs up their defense system, ramps up the amount of adrenaline and cortisol that they have. So they are going into fight. That's where we're taking them. And taking yourselves, obviously, and giving up. That exhaustion that a parent is tired. They're allowed to be tired. They're allowed to be bored. And so, coming up with solutions. And again, I go back to dancing. It's the timing of all of this. That when a child or when we are in a revved up state, we usually want a solution. But that's not the best time to make a decision, because we're not in decision-making mind, we're in emotional mind. Usually we want to get out of the situation, so we're not in our thinking space. Neither can we actually pay attention to the other person, because they've become the opposition. And she said, I know my parents care so deeply for me, but sometimes I wish at that point they would also say that they understand. And if I were talking to her, I would say, well, they can't possibly understand. They know you, but I think the difficulty on both sides is that it's finding a better form of communication, that there is a way of doing that. And when the work that I do with children is to help them to be in a more receptive state, which is to give them a method of getting rid of emptying what they call their trash can. So there isn't so much of that urgency of shifting and going into the defense state, which then is the ramping up of everything. Everything that is sensitive is ramped up to 20 rather than staying at a more level area where we can talk, we can cuddle, you know, because that's the last thing they want. And holding two opposing feelings, physical feeling overrides the fight, it calms it down, but we need to hold on, and that's the last thing they want to be in that environment, and it's probably one of the last things you will feel like doing at the time, because it's completely in opposition to the flight and fight. That's why it's called that. The other thing, and there's a whole other side to this with being in the defense state, is this area shuts down because the physiology is, and I'm sure you know, I'll just put it into the context of what I'm saying, is all the blood moves out of our body to our arms and legs, because we're supposed to be, primitive man would be running, okay, or fighting. So this is a luxury item. Now the problem with this is it stops a child digesting food properly, because once the diaphragm is shut down, it sends a message, vagus nerve, stops the peristaltic movement of digestion. So their blood sugar seems to go up and down because there isn't anything being processed at that point. Oh, lovely. Okay. So that's another thing, and that again ramps up their mood. So we might, as adults, and I've said it myself in my room, when I give a child a biscuit or something, I can see they're quite edgy, and I can't eat anything. So I never offer it, I just leave it there, because they know. The whole thing of someone giving something is it's another thing they have to respond to. They'll eat it, and after about, it's very quick actually how quickly carbs can be digested and just change the mood, and there are obviously lots of other things that you can give. It helps them then shift gear so that they're more able to engage, but we need to give them a little bit of time. We need them to catch their breath. I think one of the areas that is, I'm not going to say comparative, but I trained as a doula, so the ladies here who have given birth will know that feeling where people are giving you an awful lot of information and you just want them to get away from you. Anyone know that feeling? And they're like, okay, all this stuff coming, people in our face, and can we bring some people in to see all this going on? They're so in tune with their environment, so sensitive, because their protective force is taking over in preparation for the baby that they're delivering. And that's probably one of the only times that we as adults would know that. I can't think of an example for the gentleman here, but I'll put my mind to it. But that's a woman in defense zone, and very few other areas apart from being upset, being in trauma, would be as much as comparative to get that feeling that a child has once they are cornered. Right. So I'll keep repeating it. The aim of the game is to take them out as a corner, to give them time to breathe. I was reading something on Pinterest where they say, well, the thing about disciplining is that you're sending them up to their room to think about their negative behaviour. And I thought, how awful, because why would I want to think about negative behaviour? You want to think of something lovely. Right, because we want that file to change. We want them out of their defence zone. Think about what they've done is the last thing anyone, I should imagine, would want to do. Right? But going away from the environment cools it down a bit, cools the responses down. You have a better chance of responding in a better way to get a better outcome. Not a perfect outcome, far from it, but a better outcome. So that you are building up your confidence in your management of a situation that probably none of you want to be in. No one had the choice in this matter. And they then have some space to know that it's a bit more neutral. And children can engage with a bit more of the neutral than up here. They will, and they do.